All right, welcome Ashes Nation to another episode of The Jankyard, the longest running, most successful Ashes podcast. I'm your host for this week, Schmendrix, and I've got my two ignominious co-hosts with me, Killer Cactus.
Yo, yo.
And The Treatment.
What's up, everybody?
And this week we're going to be talking about competition, why we do it, the competitive pressure we feel, the pressure we feel to compete, and the pressure we feel not to fail. And I think that's appropriate, given that we are, at least when we're recording this, on the eve of the collection, the biggest competitive event in Ashes for the year. So that's the plan for this week. Who's been keeping up with the community? What's new? Anything worth noting? We're also on the eve of the Blitz tournament, which may be over by the time this gets released, but anything notable underway that is worth talking about before we start talking about competition?
I mean, I haven't played more than a single game in the last 3, maybe 4 weeks even. So as far as what's new in Ash's life, not much. Just talking a lot on the Discord, trying to get people to contribute to the wiki. Today we released episode 19, so there was a bunch of good chatter, I thought, going around. I thought we were a little grumpy in that episode, but people took, I think, it pretty well.
Yeah, we managed not to alienate any of our half dozen listeners, at least in that one, so that was a win. I've also been on a bit of an Ashes hiatus, I have to say. It's been a nice break to take a breather and think about what the collection is going to look like. I am a little bitter that we've stopped posting any deck lists from the Phoenix League, because I haven't been playing in the Phoenix League for the last few weeks, and I feel like I have no idea what's happening in the meta, so I'm just walking into the collection pretty much blind, except that Killer swears Herald is still good.
Yeah, play Herald Pact. There you go.
Still good. It was funny. There was a lot of chatter this morning about the stuff we talked about in that podcast before we released the podcast. People were talking about the meta and the lack of speed and that kind of stuff. And then we released the podcast and it just kept going. Which I guess was refreshing for me because I wasn't sure how hot that take of mine was, and it's maybe a little less hot than I thought. I have played a few. I've been just in Phoenix League playing one competitive game a week, basically, and still sneaking in games here and there in the mornings when I get to work really early or on my lunch or whatever. I've not seen a big change, really, in the meta other than
Post Frostwild Scourge release, you mean?
Correct, yeah, post Frostwild. The people I'm playing with, I play a lot against the same kind of players because they're the ones that are awake at 7 a.m. my time. Big Bang Boy's usually around in the morning. He's not on the Discord, but he plays on Ashteki quite a bit. He brings a variety of things. Kevin WH, again, another guy that's not on the Discord very much, at least if at all. Also brings a variety of things.
You still getting your weekly Saturday morning game against Charlotte?
We're a week or two behind on that. We tried this week. I think Charlotte had her son in town, or she had breakfast with him or something, so we didn't get to play. I haven't played Charlotte in the morning in a couple of weeks. I played Brian a couple times too, very unsuccessfully in the middle of the day. Seems to be
you don't need to say very unsuccessfully. You can just say you played Brian, and we got the idea.
Yeah, right. And Matt as well. Brian and Matt seem to be around when I take late lunches. So I play in the morning and I do fairly well against the morning players, and then if I play an afternoon game, I just get crushed, and brings my expectations back down to earth a bit.
Matt's your kryptonite.
He really is.
Yeah, Matt is, he just destroys me all the time. But that's okay. And as far as the meta goes, I haven't seen Brian and Matt Brian will play some meta decks a lot. He's been playing Hope, like a Shadowhound Hope deck, quite a bit. He's played that the last 2 or 3 times he and I have played, and it's very strong still. It's not a fast deck like we were talking about today. It's a control Hope deck.
Does it use any of the new cards? Frostfrog?
No. It might, if anything, there's Clashing Tempers, and I think that's there.
Because why wouldn't it be, honestly?
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And that's kind of what I've seen. It's, if anything, it's like either the decks that are being played have like 4 or 5 Frostwild cards in them. They're just trying like Adaptodon type stuff. Or it's Clashing Tempers and or Will to Survive. Those are the ones that seem generically good. Yeah. They seem generically good. They're making their way into decks. I played somebody on Herald maybe a week ago. I don't remember who. It might have been Ninja Dance Mad. It might have been Brian. It was somebody notable playing Herald with like a standard packed nature deck that had Butterfly Monk and Will to Survive, and it felt like Herald had 78 life. Just like it just, I mean, it was like, seriously, with Phoenix Attendant and Will to Survive and Butterfly Monk and Consume Souls, like he just has 78 life. You might as well just try and mill him because you can't like deplete his life total. I remember that feeling. And
would you say that was a good feeling? Like the best feeling?
No, I was not stoked about playing against that, but it's, suffice to say, still very strong.
I'm telling you, man, you got to push this turbo mill. You got to do it.
And I have been, right? Like, the only decks I've really played are, I've been playing Koji Fallen like a degenerate. I've been playing my Odette Immune to Ice Trap deck. And I've been playing the Turbo Mill. Like, those are the 3 decks I've basically kind of been grinding on. And I throw in a Tristan Fish game here and there just to see how viable that still is. I think it's the only deck right now that has enough speed to try and be fast. There's, like we were talking about in the Discord today, there's probably a Hope, like, Lightbringer Vampire Bat deck that is still good.
I'm surprised that Hope dropped off so significantly once Creepers was eroded. Like, the Vampire Bats is still good in Hope, but there's a lot of stuff that's still good in Hope. And
oh yeah, no doubt about it.
For it to just disappear almost like completely, at least as far as games I've watched, it's kind of crazy. I think it's one of those decks where people just were like, I'm interested in the new stuff, but if someone plays it in either Blitz or the collection, it'll do well.
Well, there's the thing, like, Hope doesn't lend theirself very well to alterations. You don't really want to boost the life of the Conjuration because then you can't duplicate it. You can use Wallop, I guess, and you can use half of Clashing Tempers, and Frost Frog is okay, but the problem there is there's a lot of other good stuff to duplicate, and I think there's many Conjurations that are better than Frost Frog for Hope to be duplicating, so it doesn't make as big of an impact. They're not really interested in Adaptodon. They're not really interested in a card like Will to Survive. So I think that contributes to part of the drop-off, is that they're just not great synergistically with this set.
Right, yeah, no, I just mean like competitively, or even just, you would expect in the massive games that there would still be at least some people playing Hope. And
I would expect that too if there was a massive games, right? But
yeah,
I mean, we're the Ashes community. We try out new stuff and we mess around with things, and that's what we do. But anyway, I mean, if you asked me today what the meta decks are, I would say it's Koji Fallen. I've not lost a game yet with that. I've never seen it lose either. It's Herald Pact. I think Hope is still up there with Brian's Shadowhound deck is, I think, very good. And I do like Odette Beef. I think that's a good deck. And I think those are tier 1 in my head only because that's what I've been seeing and using. Even like I've played against Odette multiple times. I've played against Herald multiple times. I've played against Hope like those are the big decks I've seen played against me too. I'm sure there's still other, like I'm sure Noah Fighting Spirit stuff is still good. That's kind of dropped off, but I think it's still good. There's probably I'm down on Aerodel right now, unfortunately, but there's probably an Aerodel out there that's good.
It's like she's a jilted lover. She's a jilted lover. You've written her off completely.
I love Aerodel, but I mean, I think the Cobra deck that I was running for a while is probably a good deck.
Just think how good the makeup decks will be when you finally get back together with Aerodel.
Makeup decks. I see what you did there. That's my meta report. I don't know if you asked for it, but that's what it is.
I like it.
That's a lot of decks though, and those are decks too that have proven themselves. And I think it's just a matter of now there's so much to choose from that it'll be interesting to see like the mind games almost probably by the time the collection comes of what people are going to expect is being run and then what they bring as their rock, paper, scissors choice. Even though that's not how Ashes is, but like, you know, if you expect, okay, I expect a lot of big units, maybe that pack something with a ton of removal or Odette or whatever. And then just how that plays out is always what's interesting. Cause that happened, you know, that's always happened in every sort of major tournament.
I love that Mayoni just never gets played.
Yeah. Well, not never.
Mayoni's excellent. Just never gets played. I can't remember the last time I opened up a game of Ashteki and I was like against Mayoni.
Oh, I can.
I saw someone reporting it just today. Fred played against someone and he got stomped by Mayoni, I think.
Yeah, I think my last Phoenix League game before I dropped out was against a Mayoni. And absolutely.
Hale was on Mayoni for weeks.
I think it might have been against Hale, to be honest.
Yeah.
I never see Mayoni.
Mayoni dropped off because of the rise of Herald, right? Like that's kind of expected. But yeah, no, it's not like she's bad.
Well, thank you for that meta report.
She might suffer with all this exhaustion on 0 attack stuff. I don't know.
Maybe
not. I don't know.
All right, now that we've got the meta report out of the way, so anything could win, but probably Koji. I would place a bet on Koji. For sure. Let's talk about competition and how we approach it. And I'm curious to hear, first of all, just taking a step back from Ashes, like, do you both consider yourselves competitive people? Like, do you have a strong competitive drive in everything you do, or is Ashes your main competitive outlet?
I think I'm a closet competitor. Mm-hmm. Like, I think I'm insanely competitive, and I try really hard for a reason that I don't completely understand to not present myself that way. And like, so here's example, right? Last week at Lorcana League, we have a league every week that our local game store runs for Lorcana. It's a 3-round tournament every week. There's usually 8 to 10 players. They're all a lot of the same people, and give away some product to the winners or to the top few people, which is cool because you can't find Lorcana stuff anywhere right now. So it's a good way to get stuff. I go, both my kids come, all 3 of us play, and we're like, you know, we're a third of the tournament ourselves because there's only 9 or 10 players. And all 3 of us went either 1-2 or 0-3. It was very bad. We're not used to that. And I didn't realize how angry that was about to make me until like we were done and we were driving home, and I was tilted hard. It was like, I can't believe we all did so bad, and I'm sick of, I don't want to do this bad ever again. I spent like $200 the next day on Lorcana singles to fix our decks. I was so mad. And my buddy was texting me, and he's like, you're still tilted for, I told him, I was like, I just bought 4 Elsas and 2 Dragon Maleficents yesterday online for like $200. And he goes, you're still tilted from last night. I said, yes, I am. I was. I get like that with Ashes as well. And
oh, we know. We've noticed.
Yeah, I know.
At least you can't go and buy $200 in singles, though.
Right. I can't do that to assuage myself or comfort it, right? But when I lose competitive Ashes games and they're my fault, and they almost like 99.9% of the time, if you lose an Ashes game, it's your fault. It's not a luck thing. It's not a random thing. It's something you did. I get tilted, and I try not to do that, but I do. And that feeling is why, if I have competitive anxiety around the game, that's why I don't want to feel that way. And I definitely have that. I go into competitive games nervous of instead of being confident in what I'm playing and confident in my ability to win the game, I go in instead nervous that if I lose, I'm going to be like frustrated about it for 3 days.
Why do you compete? Like, what is the driving force behind you playing competitive games?
That's a good question. I think it's, for me, it's like I want to, I guess I'd be lying if I didn't say, like, I want to win and show that I'm really good at this. Like, I just want to prove that. If not necessarily to anybody other than myself, but just want to prove that. And it's, it's not like I haven't done well, but like I really want to win a tournament one of these days, and I've been close a couple times, haven't done it. It's like the monkey on the back thing is a thing for me, and I want to try and get that off, but got to keep grinding at it, right, until it happens.
For sure.
I relate to almost all of that. A closeted competitive person is an interesting way of thinking about it. I'm probably similar in some ways.
I'm probably not really closeted. Like, I think I'm out there, but I feel like I tell myself that I am.
Yeah, no, I get that. I would say I am competitive. I'm not to like an extreme level, more out of like lack of time or dedication to anything in specific. Like I just can't take one thing and take it to the extreme level in anything. But for Ashes, for board games, previously when I played Ultimate, like Ultimate Frisbee, I would definitely, get tilted on losses, especially if I felt something was out of my control, like in team games when I played Dota, for instance, that type of thing. Those could get me really tilted. But Ashes, is something about even just going into a Phoenix League game for a long time. Like I get the shakes. Like I don't know what it is, but I just physically start shaking. And it takes a lot to try and calm down just in game. And I get so nervous and worked up. And then some games, the feeling afterwards is just, if it's not like incredible anger, it's just like, I feel gutted. Like it's just like a sick pit of my stomach. Like, why didn't I see it? Like I feel dumb sometimes. And there's something about that where, even like you say, okay, well, Ashes and most card games do have a random element to it, but we always say that it's about being the better pilot. And then it gets into your head of like, well, why can't I do this? Or why can't I be this good consistently? Or, why is it this person and not me. Like, you know, it just starts making me feel inferior. And something about Ashes, the deck building and the games, it drives me to keep playing even though I feel not great after a loss. But I do feel good after like a really challenging win or a win against, you know, the players that I consider the greats. But yeah, and then it's weird because there's virtually no stakes, right? I mean, prizes, digital alt arts, you know, an invite to just another tournament that doesn't matter in sort of any grand scheme way. Like, we're a very small community anyway, but it's about that, like, just proving it among friends and just feeling yourself that you're like, I worked hard at this. I am good enough. And I hope one day that, you know, like when I got into the top 10 ELO, like, again, it's virtually meaningless, but to me, it was like one of the most exciting parts of this year, where all last year I felt like just a super failure at the game. And then to break into that, I was like, hey, maybe I have some sort of skill. And yeah, so I don't know. It's a tough one, but it just keeps, every time there's a tournament, it's like, yeah, I'm going to jump into this, even though I haven't prepared. And so I even if I do poorly, I'm still going to be angry about it, even though there's a multitude of factors that it's like, well, what do you expect when you don't grind out games and grind out decks and really put in the preparation for it?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's striking to me that I don't think any of us has exactly what I would have called a healthy relationship to competition. Because I'm very similar. I mean, like, when I was growing up, I was such a perfectionist, and so hard on myself when I would lose basically anything. Like, I actually got cut from the A team in 7th grade volleyball because I would beat myself up so much for like missing serves. So I played on the B team, which was fun. But, like, you know, when you've got such a problematic relationship with competition that you get cut from your 7th grade volleyball team, it's really saying something. And I feel like, you know, a lot of my relationship actually to tabletop was like recognizing that was actually falling in love more with the problem solving than with the competition. And I feel like it's been a really healthy thing for me across a lot of different kinds of games to just really focus on exploring games like you are just exploring a set of solutions to really interesting problems. And if you're the one who comes up with it in a competitive game, so be it. And if your opponent does, that can be really interesting too. That has worked really well for me for a lot of different kinds of board games, especially lower interaction board games where it's, you know, not direct conflict, but, you know, any of the Euro games where you're optimizing some economic system. Does not work with Ashes, where, yeah, you really can't get away from the fact that it is, what, you know, one-on-one, highly intellectual, very low luck, high skill. There aren't really a lot of outs and not a lot of places to hide from just the question of, you know, did you play better in that game than your opponent? There's obviously matchups. I think that's probably, if I wanted to find a psychological out for letting myself off the hook for a loss, that's probably the single most important one, is like, there are matchup considerations in Ashes, and sometimes you just bring the wrong deck, especially to, you know, a closed list game or in a open list game where you just have an unfavorable matchup. But I think it's, and similarly to you all, you know, like, I think there's only one person who can be the best. And so most of your games, or at the end of the day, I think all of us are going to be worse than Carl, probably for the foreseeable future until he quits or we quit. But so it's not really about being the best. Like, I don't feel like I've got any kind of Michael Jordan-esque aspirations here, because that's clearly out of reach. But I feel like when I go into games, the thing that really bothers me is when I make stupid mistakes, or I feel like relatively simple things tripped me up. A lot of the times that happens when I don't feel as focused as I could be. And that's a whole other issue, is how to actually prepare for a competitive game in a way that leads to focus. And around the edges here, the guys can see me on video in this podcast, but I've been trying to get my 5-year-olds to stay in the bedroom and telling them they don't actually need to floss their teeth for the 3rd time this evening. But that's like a very common thing that happens when I'm trying to play right after bedtime, typically, because I'm in Mountain Time Zone and most opponents are on the East Coast, and I don't want it to be too late for them. And so, yeah, those nights when I've got a big competitive game and I'm half distracted by kids running around and like I'm trying to stay in it, and then I make some stupid mistake, that's when I can start to feel really frustrated with myself that, you know, I just didn't really give myself a chance to win that game. But I feel like there must be people who have a healthy relationship to competition, who don't wrap their entire ego up in each individual game of ashes, right? Those people exist.
Yeah, I mean, they do. And people will, I mean, what's interesting is, you know, all of us on, at least on the Discord, we all put forward that sort of friendly, humble, I guess, persona, especially, you know, when you lose. Like, it's good sportsmanship to say GG, but I know that sometimes I say it and I'm like, this was not a good game. Like, either I just totally screwed up and I feel like utter garbage, and like it's almost like an insult. Like I know that it's never intentional, but you know, you just lose so horribly, and then someone's like, you know, good game, and I'm just like, no, I need to go off and rage for the next, you know, 5 to 10 hours and distract myself, because that was not a good game. Like, it was a, you know, epic failure. But we all put that forward, and I wonder how many other people, especially because we do play online and, you know, never with video unless you're in the webcam league, but you're not like actively looking at the person afterwards and they're like, yeah, I'm super angry, right? Everyone's like, good game, yep, next time. And then you just don't see them for a while playing another game. They just rage quit. So I don't know. I bet there's more people who share our competitive sort of edge and frustrations than not. But I know there are definitely people who just look at this as a casual pastime, who don't either play competitive or are just like, hey, I'm just using a tournament as an excuse to force myself to get in some games in a week period. And it, you know, brush it off as nothing. And then there are the others who are newer, who are like, I expect to lose. I just want to learn and get better. And there's some sort of threshold after you've entered the game where eventually in your mind, your expectation is like, I now have enough experience and knowledge that I should be winning at least some of the time. And I think that it's the expectation of winning that then really get you tripped up. But it can be the opposite sometimes. Like, I go into games with, you know, Carl or Brian, and I immediately have the opposite expectation. Like, I'm going to lose. And that's problematic too, because that can put a damper on your opportunities and your thought process of like looking at the game and seeing possible play lines, because you're just like, this is hopeless. Like, I should just, you know, I'm just going to play a little bit sloppier. And then I give myself excuses of why I lost. So it's hard, man.
I feel that a lot. What that last thing you just said, like going in with the expectation that you're going to lose the game. If you do that, you probably are going to lose the game. Like you can't go in with that thought process. But it's all a confidence thing, and it's very difficult when, you know, you're like you or like myself, I think, where, you know, we're both talking about this need to prove it to ourselves. And that's, you know, I'm not trying to spit fire at you here, but I'm spitting at myself too. That's a self-confidence thing, right? That's you know, this innate desire to prove yourself. I've had that my whole life with everything that I do. So I'm not surprised that I have it here as well. And it's, I hate bringing up Lorcana over and over, but I do think that just the nature of Ashes as a game, how it's marketed, how it's presented, where it's it's different, not contradictory. It's different than a Lorcana or a Magic the Gathering, where like it's the group of people playing it aren't necessarily here for the super competition. It's not like Ashes is having $1,000 tournaments every week. It's not like there's stuff that's going to happen with these big prizes on the line that people want to win more than anything else. But you look at another game and where that is happening, and you see these YouTubers that are just grinding games online, and you can tell their confidence level is different. Like, they're going into the game with this, meta net deck, expecting to win. They're not concerned with who they're playing against. They're not concerned with really anything other than potentially the matchup of cards that they're against. And if they, normally, and a lot of the YouTube streamers won't show the games they lose, right? They'll show a couple. They'll go over their deck, and then they'll play 3 games, and they win all 3, but they probably played, who knows, maybe they played 10, and those are the only 3 they won. But I like the ones that show their losses, and a lot of times, if they lose a game, they're not saying like, "Oh yeah, I just played terrible." It's like it's something else's fault, and that they'll talk about, I had a bad draw, or that's just a tough matchup for my deck, or whatever. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not, but the attitude is what interests me, right? They're going into that game confident, right? Like, I didn't mess this up, and while that might not be the right answer, and it's not always a healthy thing, because if you are screwing something up and you're not recognizing it, then you don't improve. But it allows someone like that to go into the next game without that I'm going to lose mindset, and can be a little more successful. And they're not afraid to jump into the next game either, right? It's just a confidence thing. Again, not always, in my opinion, not the greatest way to think sometimes, if it's really true that, it's your fault that you lost the game and not some random element. But that mentality to go in there and grind and not be afraid to lose and improve, right? Get in there, grind games, improve. There's been times where I've went to sit down at a computer to play any game, Ashes, Lorcana, whatever it is, and just been like, I don't really want to. Like, I have time to do it right now, but I don't feel like going in there and losing a game, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I've definitely done that.
And it's like, but if I that's contradictory to what I'm trying to do. If I want to prove myself in this game, and I know how to get better, the answer to getting better is to go in there and practice, play the deck that works well, and play it against good players. That's how you improve. If I'm not willing to do that, then you're not going to improve, right? I feel like I'm telling this stuff to my kids all the time in all elements of life, and then I sit there and don't do it myself. But that's where, like, I watch some of these YouTubers playing card games, and I'm jealous of that fire just to get back in there and compete and grind a deck and brush off a loss, whether they're brushing it off for the right reason or not, just brushing off the loss. Like, I lose a game, whatever, it's over, next game. Like, let's change that somehow and make it work this time.
So it's just that one point though that you said about, like, having time and then just being like, I don't really want to lose now. That is probably one of my biggest flaws. And I will, if I'm kind of in the mood to play, but like I have that, I don't want a loss, or I don't want a crushing loss. More like, if you lose a close game, it's whatever. But some games, or some days I should say, I won't put up a game. I won't create a game because I don't want somebody else that will just crush me, right? Like I don't want you, killer, to jump in my game when I'm just feeling like I just want a regular game. And so, or even if I see you have an open game, I'm like, I'll wait for somebody else. And that is probably my biggest flaw, because it doesn't help me get better, and it doesn't help me get over that, like that fear of just on to the next one. And somebody who, I mean, obviously, somebody like Carl, we talk about him a lot, but somebody who used to just not care and just go all the time was Monk. And his motto was always be testing. And I really admired that, because he would have like 3 hours and he would just pump game after game after game. But he was the one creating it. And it's something that I think I need to do more, is just create a game and have the mindset of like, whatever, I'm just going to play, and just use it as like a data point in my own improvement or in my deck's improvement, rather than giving the excuse of like, I just want to, nitpick some games that I think I could have a better chance at.
I mean, I do think there's something really interesting here, which is, Michael Jordan had become Michael Jordan by playing pickup ball all the time. Like he was taking foul shots over and over again. Like he both hates to lose. I think, famously, he absolutely hates losing. But also I think, like a lot of top athletes and a lot of people who are at the top of their games, you don't practice only through competition. You do drills, you solve chess problems. And like in Ashes, there are very few tools that we can use to practice except playing games. So I do think it's interesting that, this finding outlets where you can effectively practice without creating that kind of competitive pressure on yourself is actually not very easy in Ashes, because I admire the people who have the willingness to grind the one-on-one games against themselves, basically, in Ash Techie. That feels like very uncompelling to me. I've played chess and have solved a bunch of chess problems, and like that would be a lot more interesting, and we don't have the equivalent of that, and it would take a lot of work to do it. But those kinds of dynamics are the ones that I feel like I'd be interested in trying to figure out, because like I said, right now it's like, yeah, if you want reps, you need to be competing, and that can be exhausting. It's a hard thing to do.
It also takes longer too, right?
Yeah.
Like you're committing to a game, and the only option is either you bail, and then you're, at least me, I feel like I'm screwing somebody else's time, right? Because you do sometimes only have those available windows. So it's like, well, I just wasted someone else's 20 minutes because maybe they only had an hour and now they don't have enough time to play another game or whatever. And so it's just, yeah, it's like, I've thought it before. Is there a way to have chess-like problems? Because I think that would be really interesting. And someone brought up that they were doing like a new TikTok channel or something. And that was one of my like thoughts of like, here's a board state, what is the best move? And now the issue is that unlike, basketball, if you're using that, or any sport where there's an absolute, you got it in the net or you didn't, it's a little more nuanced and probably more subjective in Ashes as to what the right play is. And end game type of problems probably aren't as interesting because the discrepancy or like the information is much more, is much less difficult to solve. So it'd be the mid game moves that would be the most interesting to solve. But then how do you decide what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah, you said, I had two thoughts for what Schmendrix said, to create some situations in which we could train without having to play games. That was one of them, and I was going to say that exact thing. When I was big into Summoner Wars, we used to put puzzles up on that was before Discord. That was back in forum days. And somebody would throw up a screenshot of in that case, it was just like a chess puzzle, right? Summoner Wars is very similar to chess in that aspect. It's got a board with pieces on it that you move around, basically. and somebody would throw up a scenario and say, okay, you have to kill the summoner. How do you do it? Here's the cards in your hand. Here's the board state. How do you kill the summoner? And it was fun to solve those puzzles. Again, very similar to like a classic chess puzzle where you have to checkmate the king in one move or whatever. I think in Ashes, the equivalent to that is, here's a board state. What do you do? What's the best move? And I think that'd be a very beneficial conversation to throw up in the Discord and have people comment their opinions on. Right? Here's the board state. Here's my hand. Here's my remaining dice. What's my main action? What's my side action right now?
Yeah.
Like, just that decision. And because that's knowing how to make that decision is the most important element of Ashes, the most important aspect of Ashes, period. Breaking down a game of Ashes into what is the best course of action to take every single turn. If you know how to do that, then you're the best player in Ashes. Right? That's all Ashes is choosing the best course of action in every turn. If your deck is good, right? If you have a cohesive deck to start with. So I think that'd be extremely beneficial. I will try. I always say I'm going to do these things. I never do them, but I want to try. Like, next time I'm playing a game, if I come to a point where I have to stop and think for a minute, and I guess I would tell this to all the listeners that are listening too, if you're playing games on Ash Techie, if you come to a turn where you have to think about what your next play is for a second, just take a screenshot before you do it, and then throw it up on the Discord after the game. Be like, here was this situation, right? I did this. What would you do?
What if
I
we
think
did
that'd be
that?
a really cool thing to have. I think we should do it.
Like, we have the forum right now for deck building. What if we created a forum, or just, it could just be a channel to start, where it was like an Ashes puzzle of the day type of thing, and that it was just a board state from a game, ideally one where you have to know who the ultimate winner was, so that maybe we could kind of say, well, this was the correct move, like, because it's really hard to say this was the correct move. The winner of a game could still have made a mistake, but show that. And then equivalently, I don't think it's just about the right move. I could see it being a sequence of moves, and maybe that's better in video or whatever format, and pointing out what the error was. Because sometimes you immediately know your own mistake and you're like, I should not have done this. Right. And I think those are as helpful as what is the optimal play.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to go any further than, what's your main action and side action right now. Because like you said, we don't know if it's the right move until the game's over. And even then it's, just because you won the game doesn't mean that was the best thing you could have done in that situation. And just because you lost doesn't mean it was the worst thing you could have done. But just a ton of discussion, if nothing else, over stuff like that, I think would be really beneficial. Getting the top players to weigh in on, I would have done this, and here's why I would have done this. I feel like could be hugely beneficial to anyone that reads it, especially newer players that are coming in to understand. Like, again, that's the toughest thing, I think, for people to grasp, at least early on, is how do I sequence my attacks? How do I get away from attacking the Phoenixborn, attack guys, and stuff like that. And I think those are going to bring some of that stuff to light. So that's a really interesting thing that I will, as I play games, try and remember to take screenshots to do. But it would be really cool if a lot of people started doing that and then we discuss them. The other thing I was going to say is maybe our next episode of the Jankyard is just a testing episode where we get on. Like, this is not done enough, and I liked it when the Shuffle Bus guys did this a couple of times, where, like, Neil would get on with Carl, I think they did it a couple times, and play like an open-handed game against each other and just discuss every play they made, like, and test things.
Yeah, they were only doing round one, and that was especially around the time of, like, the Brennan deck. That was an issue.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's not done enough. Like, the three of us could sit around and do, if we really wanted to get better at this game, I mean, that's what other people in bigger games do. They get these testing groups and they sit down and grind through situations to determine what's the best deck, and they just bash them against each other and discuss it until they come up with what they think the best call for the meta is in any given event that they're going to. I think that'd be a cool idea for an episode for us to just, all three of us get into an Ashteki room, two of us get a game going, and then open hands to everyone and just talk about each move as we do it. What's here, we're playing this, what's the best game? What's the best move in this certain situation?
I agree. It's a really cool idea, and I think it's good content for us and just in general for the community, like a repository almost of just talking through games and states and first fives and whatever.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think we're coming up with lots of good ideas. As you were talking, I went to the internet, the source of all wisdom and truth in the world, and I was looking for how to actually develop a healthy competitive mindset. Like, what does that mean? What does it look like? And found an article actually it's a parenting website about how to develop a healthy competitive mindset in children. But given that, I feel like
given that we're children,
we may have that level of development. It's actually fascinating how many of the themes we've drawn out. So I'm just gonna say what the 5 things are here. So one is connect winning with effort, and a corollary to that is disconnect the idea that your success is based on your inherent ability or inherent worth, but instead on the practice and work you've put in. Redefine success, so it's not only about winning but also about learning and improving, and help kids measure their incremental improvement beyond wins and losses. 3 is learn from the competition, including your own past performances, but also your competitors. Create a healthy team culture, and I think this is actually really interesting in the context of a testing group. So actually try and use a kind of team culture to model sportsmanship within the team, for example, and be the community in which you're learning about what works and what doesn't. And then the last one is practice at home. So creating safe spaces where kids can practice what they're doing without as much judgment or focus, which is really what we're just talking about with the need for puzzles and other kinds of outlets. So I feel like we've hit on almost all of these, but I will just say, having read this, that I think a lot of the roots of my challenges come down to that first one, which is that I think I struggle most with just recognizing that the success of any given game isn't a reflection on my inherent ability as a player of Ashes, like universally, and like that whole concept that's even a thing you should be concerned about is probably what needs to get broken down, at least for me. That you're as good as your last 10 practice games have been, and the amount of effort you've put into understanding your deck and the possible responses to your deck. And if you lose, it's probably because you haven't put in the work. And as a parent of young kids, I feel like there are a lot of reasons why I can give myself grace for not putting in enough work when it comes to Ashes. So
there are 2 things there that if I reflect on, sort of were like my success earlier this year, where I started going on just a run of doing really well, I think came down to 2 things. One is that I decided at the start of the year, I was like, I'm going to take this, more seriously than I did last year with a lot of wild ideas. And I settled on, I think, a couple decks. And I made sure that they were as good as I could, make them. And I just played them every tournament, every week in Phoenix League. And the repetition and the ability to iterate on the same idea was something that we had talked about in one of our, I think the top 15 tips to get better, but it did make me better. And then I quickly fell off and started testing, once or twice with every new deck idea that I had, but that was where I had some of the most success, and it was really refreshing. I also think that in terms of not tying your your success to just the result of like a win or a loss. Something that helped me in a more subtle way was the introduction of Phoenix League. Not because it was lower stakes of any kind, but because of the duration of it, as opposed to tournaments, especially the shuffle bus tournaments, which were very much like just the way the round robin or the pods worked out. It was, you have 3 games or 4 games if you're lucky. And if you lose the first, because of the way the assignments work with blood points and whatever, win-loss records, you immediately either have no shot at making a top cut, and it almost felt like, well, what's the point in playing if I have no shot in going? And so then you just immediately start to perform worse, or you don't care. That was really bad. And also because it was only 3 or 4 games, and those not restricted to shuffle bus tournaments, but tournaments that we've had, that's not enough. And so then you feel like your success is tied to, did I make a top cut, or, if not win or not, and that's it. It's almost like a black and white thing. Whereas with Phoenix League and First 5 League, you could say, okay, I just have to get 12 wins out of 50, but I can measure my long-term progress. Am I slowly getting better at this game? Am I working towards something? And there's more data to explore, and you can see yourself improving. And so it's not tied to the individual game or even just 1 week of like AshCon. It's, hey, over the next 6 months, am I going to get better? And I think that's a big thing too, that sort of alleviates the stress of a tournament, whether open or closed.
Yeah, those are good points. I 100% agree with all of that. And I'll piggyback a little bit by, again, encouraging people that are having issues with this to swallow your pride a bit. If you have pride about the deck that you're playing, swallow it a bit and pick up something that is known to be good. And I know that, Ashes.live, we talked about this last time, might not be the easiest place to find something like that, but come on the Discord and ask questions. If you don't, we'll tell you what the meta decks are and point you to a place where you can find one. But play that, right? Pick that deck up. Take that part of the equation, the deck building part of the equation, out of your confidence level going into any given competitive match. Learn that deck and understand it, and play that. Right, it just takes so much of the stuff out. I've played too many competitive games where I've gone in with some kind of home brew that I made that's untested or not tested enough, and gotten slaughtered and been upset about that. And it's just understanding what your expectation is, right? If your expectation is I want to win this game, then play something that's gonna win this game, or that has a good chance to win the game. I'll go back to my Lorcana story. I was tilted after that week. I spent all that money and bought cards, but that was like a therapeutic thing. But what I did so yesterday we had another league night, right? I went and looked at, I went against everything in my gut and looked online at the decks that have done really well and built a similar one. I put my own spin on it because I had to feel somewhat not terrible about myself for net decking because I hate doing it. But but still, it was basically like, all right, here's a proven deck that I can build now with the cards I bought, and I'm gonna spin it to something that fits my style, and went and played and went 3-0 and was excited about that. And was it because I was net decking a top competitive deck? A little bit, but I was a lot more confident going into those games. Like, I know that the deck I had the week before wasn't good. I knew it had a terrible matchup, one specific one. I ran into that 3 times in my 3 games and lost those, or at least 2 of those. But went into this one thinking, okay, feel a lot better about my matchups now. I don't know what I'm going to face, but I'm a lot more confident in my chances against the field running this and perform better, right? And I think that attitude going in was a big part of that.
So I have a question then. Obviously, because we've said that before, like, you know, set yourself up in order to win. In my mind, sometimes this happens where if I do have the best shot, right? If I was playing, let's say, the definitive best deck and I went 0-3, like I lost everything. How do you deal with that psychologically? Because then that's almost like, it almost feels like a worse hit, right? Because you can't give yourself the excuse of, well, I'm not bringing the best, or, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's, I had the best deck and I still just am, you know, terrible. And that, how do you deal with that?
I'm gonna apply the healthy lessons from these healthy competitive mindset. So treatment, my son, I know you're really stressed about the loss, but like, let's think back over what you did to prepare and, you know, what your opponents were doing to counter you. Like, let's break it down, because I think have to separate again. I think the most profound thing for me is separating, and I heard it creep into the way you described that, like, can't take every loss like a judgment of your worth as a person or a competitor. It's just, it's an indicator of where you are in a process. And, you know, maybe you hadn't put enough time into learning the deck yet, or you picked it up because it was the right meta deck, but it actually has some tricky lines that you haven't learned. I mean, in Ashes, that's one of the hardest things, is the piloting skill is so high, I think, and the game is so complex that, one of the reasons why net decking is so important is that you have to learn the lines when you pick up the deck. It's not as simple as, okay, I've got a strong deck now and the lines are going to be pretty straightforward and obvious. Sometimes that's true, but most of the time it's not. And my best period this year, I've had a couple of really good runs. One was when I was playing a bunch of Killer's decks and basically picking up decks that Killer felt were good and playing them and letting myself off the hook from building. And then the other period was I made a deck that still feels strong, and I played it a lot and learned it and had really good success with it. But one of the dangers of putting a lot of time into a bad deck, I think, is that you end up spending a lot of time trying to learn lines that are just not good lines to learn. Like, yeah, they might be the right lines for that deck, but actually you shouldn't be bothering to figure out how your bad deck counters the strongest open, because like its counters are not good. They're not the kinds of things that a good deck would be trying to do. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, I think, let me speak for myself, because I think I've been in those situations before where I'm beating myself up. I think I'd really try and remind myself that to focus on what I actually learned despite the 3 losses, and what I could have done differently to prepare, and what I could learn from my opponents in those matchups.
Killer, what do you do when you're tilted other than buy more cards? Like with Ashes,
shots.
Let's say. What, like, I have maybe 1 or 2 things that I try and do when I'm super tilted, like after my loss to No Such Method in the finals, because I was just so frustrated. A lot of my frustration wasn't even at him; it was at losing, and it was that I blame Fallen. But like, I just,
it was their fault.
For me, I just have to completely get away from my computer, and then thankfully, I have young kids, and anything that takes most of my attention away, or all of my attention away, so that I can put Ashes in the background and then just let that sort of cool and not think about it at all, and then come back to it later more logically, helps. Because sitting at the computer or trying to play the next game, or brooding, or looking at the deck, Ashes live for another deck build, that never helps. But what do you do?
So I don't think I'm the healthiest person to answer this question, because I don't think I cope with it well. But in reality, what I normally do is complain a lot And then I realize after a little while of complaining that I'm not complaining about the right thing. Usually what happens, I get really frustrated, I whine a lot, I complain a lot. A few hours later, I realize that I shouldn't be complaining about that. There's a different underlying problem. And I usually don't feel better until I get back on the horse, so to speak. Like I take the opposite approach. I usually get right back into a game, and if it'll be really bad for the first couple hours. I will lose more because I'm fired up, but I don't feel better until I want to say, and this sounds really shallow, I want to say I don't feel better until I win a game.
Yeah, no, I think that's not shallow. I think that's fair.
It might be. I mean, that might be the honest truth. I think what I want to say is I don't feel better until I play some more and realize that, you know, I can get over the hump of whatever I was running into previously. I probably equate that in my subconscious to winning another game of Ashes, but I feel like deep down the reality is I need to just get past that whatever thing it was that tilted me and proved to myself that I learned from it, whatever it is. I do think, like Schmendrix said, that's the most important thing, is trying to learn from what happened and treat it as a learning experience. It's so hard to do, man. I tell my kids all the time. My intern number 2 is notorious for getting really, really upset at himself specifically for losing or not even losing, just making a mistake. He's it's to, like, you know, we're trying to work through schoolwork and stuff, and it's like I'm trying to show him what he got wrong and why, and he gets down on himself. And I'm constantly just like, dude, you know, what do we say when you make a mistake, right? You own it, you apologize for it if you need to, and then you learn from it. And I'm saying that all the time to them. And it's, you know, I'm really good at preaching things and not practicing what I preach.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an age-old tradition.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's the answer, right? It's like you lose a game. It's like, okay, first of all, own it, right? Like, own the loss. And that's what I struggle with at the beginning, because I will whine about, I do it to you guys in the group chat all the time. I just get on there and start whining about something. But then it's like, you got to own the fact that you lost the game, right? Apologize to yourself for losing it, right? It's okay that we lost one, and then learn from the mistake and figure out why and how do you come back from it. And I need to get better at that because I don't deal with it in a healthy way, but I want to, and I usually will get a lot better about it after I come down from the initial rage. But it's not until I get back online and play Ashes that that I'm back. If I don't play, like if I don't get back into another game, I will sit there and brood and just dwell on that game. Like, card games are my hobby, and I have lots of hobbies, but card games are the one that, like, occupies my brain space. When my brain's not focused on something else, I'm thinking about card games, right? And Ashes specifically is one of them that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And that's naturally where my brain will go when it's not occupied with something else. And if I'm stuck in, like, a brooding mentality, I don't get back in there and play and, you know, get over it, I'll just, like, eat myself alive, and that's terrible. So I have to get back in there on the horse.
I mean, I really, at least in the immediate post-loss phase, like up to at least an hour later, I do not deal with it well. Like, even just physically, it's such an awful feeling that I hate. But I do think that there are at least a few things, and every person's going to be different, that you can do. One thing that I do find can help is reflecting on where I was and where I've come. So in the same way, like thinking about what I learned, right? Thinking about what my successes have been up to a certain point. So when I did lose against No Such Method in the finals, that was my first ever, I guess it was the semifinals, that I've ever been to. It was, I think, even my first top cut. So to me, I was just thinking about like where my progress was, because that was a big moment. And it's like, okay, I've at least made it this far. Now I just got to keep going. Next time I'll make it hopefully farther. The other thing is something that I don't think is helpful. And, you know, this is not anything against Mrs. Treatment. But you mentioned like card games are your hobby, and something, you know, she said is like, oh, well, just try and think of it like it's just a game. It doesn't matter. And at least for me, that doesn't work, because to me, it does matter. To me, there's something about Ashes. There's something about the competing of it. There's something about getting better, because it's my hobby. It's my passion. I love to deck build. I love to play, that it does matter. You know, in the grand scheme of life, it does not, sure, but that doesn't change how you feel and how much you care about at least the game or the aspect of winning and doing well. So it's something that I don't ever try and think about. I just try and think about in the moment what I have done, and then, like you said, get on the horse. Eventually, that next success is important. I don't think that's shallow. I think that's like hugely important to feel like you're back, right? That you're like, okay, now I'm back in it. I just got to keep going, because the losing streaks, even not even like a tournament or whatever, just the losing streak. You know, if you play rarely and you lose 2-3 weeks in a row, and you're just like, man, what's the point? Like, I just keep losing. That first win, you're like, oh, right, yes, okay. Now I just got to keep working at that and learn from whatever I just did and try and repeat that success.
Well, good.
But, yeah.
I feel like we've done it. Have we done
it? Break a glass. Throw something at the wall.
Yeah,
rage in a corner.
That's the healthy way to deal with it.
Yeah, yell into a pillow.
Yeah, that's good. Well, good. I'm glad to know that the therapy industry is not going to suffer for lack of business anytime soon, thanks to our contributions. But I think it's part of the inspiration for this episode was just to recognize that I think a lot of people coming into the game are going to have the experience of lots of losses in the beginning. This is something that we've talked about a lot. And even if you're really experienced in the game or a rookie for 6 years running, case of Alfred, as he jokes about it sometimes on the Discord, you know, I think you're going to go through losing streaks and face down patches and make semifinals for the first time and lose them sometimes. And, you know, you just got to figure out how to approach the game in a way that's healthy and keeps in mind what we love about it and doesn't turn it into another excuse to beat yourself up, since it sounds like all three of us, at least on this call, have that strong tendency.
I want to put it out to, because I think this is an important topic. Like, it's a mental health thing too, right? Like, it's like the frustration, whatever, can get to you. And, you know, nobody in my book is harder on himself than Alfred. Like, that guy, man, he is just really hard on himself. And I try and boost him up a lot, because he's not as bad as he says he is, but he's not bad at all. He's a really good player. No, why? Because he compares himself, like we said, to success, and he's like, well, I've played for 6 years, and, you know, I'm not a top 10 player or whatever. Like, you know, he can't beat Carl. He always loses to Brian, blah, 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 blah. And he just lets that eat at him forever. And then, you know, it's to the point where he's like, maybe I've played this game for so long, but I'm not good, so I should just quit the game entirely. And I know that is not a unique, like I'm singling him out, and maybe I shouldn't be, but it's not a unique thing to feel that way when you just don't have success for a while at anything in life, that maybe you should give up. And so I think it's important to like reflect, and I'm interested in hearing from other people, especially the top, you know, the top players. Like Matt has won when in 1.0 when he won the big tournament and stuff like that. And Carl and Brian, like, what are their experiences? What are their techniques to deal with hard losses? Because they've, we say they win all the time, but they lose a lot too. And so I'm interested to hear what their techniques are emotionally and psychologically when they do have a rough game or when they know they're getting into a tournament. Are they just like super like solid, like, yeah, I'm going to win this? Do they have that confidence, or do they go in nervous, and then what do they do afterwards?
It's a great question.
Agreed.
In the meantime, stay janky.
Frog up. Wolf
Frog
down.
up.
Or don't stay janky. Net deck and
Yeah, that's true.
Net deck and win. Yeah.
Oh God, we've come a long way, guys.
yeah.
If you're not janky, you're net decking and winning.
Exactly.
That'll be our new sign-up.
Right.
We'll get a new
Frog
t-shirt.
Up, wolf down, net deck.
Oh God, it's getting worse every time. Have a good one.
All right, guys. Peace.
Peace.